Do you ever get frustrated? Occasionally. You guys are more transparent at 11:15 than my 9:30 crew. I only got one like, no, at 9:30 today. One of the things right now that's happening in the world around us that you've probably heard about to a degree is that we are in a season of mass frustration. We're in a season in which people are burning out. People are resigning from their jobs at a rate of like 40%, trying to move on or quitting entirely. This has happened in the church space and ministry spaces, people resigning and quitting in the midst of great frustration. And the thing is that in this moment that we might be able to point our fingers toward a couple of different things at times, but sometimes we can't even actually just identify all of the sources of our frustration, but we're tired. We're tired. The constant sense of pivot and change and do this and do that. And I'm not sure if I'm coming or I'm going or where I've been or where I'm headed next sometimes, right? And it is exhausting to us. And I don't want to speak any negativity over your life today. If you're like the most energizing person in the planet and you haven't felt any of this frustration or fatigue from recent seasons, awesome, right? That's amazing. I'm so glad, right? I'm so glad. But for the majority of us in this moment in which we live, frustration seems to be a little bit of the name of the game, where we're quitting jobs, we're quitting church, we're quitting family, divorce is happening at a huge increasing rate right now. People are walking out on families at an increasing rate. There's fatiguing frustration, and we're tired. And so that thought in my mind that I went back to this story I find in Exodus chapter 16 in the Old Testament, the Bible, where we find the Hebrew people having been freed from slavery in Egypt, and God has brought them out of that, but now they're in this zone that feels like they're kind of in the middle of nowhere. In between that which was Egypt in their past, in their rearview mirror, and the promise of promised land in their future, nowhere in sight. And this is where they're at, in a frustrating situation, growing weary. So here's how Exodus chapter 16 verse 1 describes this. It says, the whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin. This is not sin in terms of darkness and things that we do wrong. This is a geographical location here of the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, which is oftentimes the place that great frustration sets in on us in our lives, isn't it? When it is that I can identify some place that I have come from, and I can identify what it is that is out in front of me, but right now in the middle of all of this, I can't make any sense out of this. I'm simply in a nowhere kind of place, in this place with the desert of sin that we really can't even track down exactly to this day, just because it was in the middle of nowhere. And it is in this spot that says on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt in the desert, the whole community grumbled. They're all together. They're united. It's just that their unity is not based around something that is helpful and good. They're united in their complaint, right? They're united in their grumbling. The whole community of them is grumbling, complaining. And on one hand, when you're in the middle of nowhere, we can give them some grace. When they're in the middle of the desert, not knowing what it is that is happening next. But here's what they say. The Israelites said to them, to Moses and Aaron, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Isn't it amazing in frustration how we start to apply intent to other people? That the whole Israelite community in this moment, because of their frustration, begin to think this way of Moses and Aaron. The only reason why you brought us here was to die. That's the only explanation. They seem to miss all of this, of the great lengths that Moses went to go and talk to the most powerful person on the planet, Pharaoh, right? And humbly come before him and say, hey, Pharaoh, would you let God's people go? Don't kill me, please, right now, you know? They seem to have missed out on or forgotten that there was a Red Sea moment in which horses and chariots were chasing them, and Moses picks up a stick and parts the Red Sea, the power of God parting the Red Sea, so it is that they can go free. And they begin to, in their frustration, imagine, well, the only possibility is that you went to all of that trouble because you wanted for me to die. This is a sign, frustration, it's getting the best of us. That the fatiguing frustration over the situation that we are in has brought us to a place where we are turning against people who care for us. We are imagining always the worst. We've grown so cynical that we think that every person in the world is like the worst person that we've ever met. That everybody must be like Pharaoh. That everybody must be trying to manipulate us. That everybody must be trying to ruin our lives and to end our lives. This is a fatiguing frustration that has set in on this entire community at this particular point in time. And in large part, again, let's give them some grace. Let's give all of ourselves some grace in the midst of the frustration that we feel and the fatigue that we're experiencing, because there's a lot of things that are not in your control. There are a lot of things that weren't in their control. They didn't pick the desert. They didn't pick this moment of great uncertainty. They didn't pick all of these things to happen to them. It was out of their control. There are so many things in the midst of frustration that we can't control. But I want to talk for a few moments about those things that are actually within my control. Or control may be the wrong word, but there are things in which I can either add to my own frustration, or I could gain some new perspective to be able to help myself in the midst of it. All right, so I'm gonna give us 3 words fueling your frustration. 3 words fueling your frustration. If frustration was a fire, these 3 things are things that would be like pouring fuel on that fire to burn the frustration that's on the inside of you in a more intense way than ever before. Here's the first one. It's forgotten. 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 Sometimes I'm more frustrated because of what I've forgotten. Sometimes what I have forgotten is one of the leading causes of my own frustration. And I don't mean forgetfulness in this way that every time I go to the store, I seem to arrive there and to think to myself, now wait a second, which flavor of yogurt, right? Is it peach? Is it pear? And I know that when I get home, my 4-year-old is going to remind me that I should have gotten the right kind. And she will refuse to eat it, and she will refuse to speak to me for the rest of the day, right? She's a jewel. I love her like that. I'm not talking about that kind of forgetfulness, all right? I'm talking about the kind of forgetfulness here that the entire Israelite community seemed to apply. Did you notice that when they remembered Egypt, the only thing that they remembered about Egypt is that we sat around pots of food? Biblical scholars in the room, you and I know that's not what their lives were like when they were in Egypt. Part of the reason why God brought them out of Egypt to begin with is that they were praying and they were pleading with God that this demand for performance was too much. The physical demand to build was too much. The psychological demand to try to fit in was too much. The emotional demand of knowing that they weren't meant for that, but that's what they were subjected to, was too much. Come on, they had all of these things weighing on them, but in this moment of frustration, they had forgotten how bad the bad actually was. And they had forgotten the only reason why they had made it to that place to begin with is because God had brought them out. See, the way that I feel my frustration sometimes is because I forget. They remembered the food, but they forgot how demanding the performance was. They realized that they were at this place where they were free, but they had forgotten that it was God who brought them out. And oftentimes in our lives, this is why we get frustrated. We forget. We imagine that which wasn't so great to be better than it actually was, and that which was difficult sometimes be even worse. Sometimes we do this as married people. Sometimes part of our frustration in marriage is because we had forgotten some of those lonely nights when we were single and we were crying and we were praying, God, please send me somebody. And God sent you somebody and you made a vow to that somebody, but now you're frustrated with that somebody because you forgot how lonely it was without that somebody. It's not everybody's story, and being married is not the point of life for all of our single people. I like to remind us of that. Also, sometimes we get to these places in marriage where we imagine singleness to have been so much better than it actually was. I run into guys all the time who are like, I just remember those days when I had this long line of ladies standing outside of my dorm room, knocking on my door saying, please pick me for Saturday night, right? It's amazing how we forget that that's not actually how it was. It's amazing how quickly that we forget that some of those times where we were in all of these relationships, that it was some of those dysfunctional relationships that left you brokenhearted and alone, sitting by yourself, eating a half-gallon of butter pecan, which is the only reason why anybody would eat butter pecan is when their heart is broken, right? Because butter pecan just couldn't be vanilla, right? It's like I wanted to be vanilla or I wanted to actually have flavor, but all I could do was be butter pecan. Right? Sometimes we forget. We forget. We weren't all that in a bag of chips. Sometimes we look back, this happens all the time. Oh, back in the good old days when I had all my hair. It took a while to fix that stuff. Back in the day, when I was stronger and I was fit, I also visited the gym a lot. You know what I'm saying? And back in the day, I forget. Right, I forget sometimes some of these things of the past, and without even realizing it, I fuel my present frustration because of what it is that I've forgotten. And come on, church, sometimes we do this with ourselves. As Jesus followers, we add to our frustration and fuel our frustration because we forgot I was lost in my sin before Jesus found me. Come on, I was all alone, hopeless and helpless by myself until Jesus came along and invited me to himself and said, hey, let me free you from that. Come on, let me forgive you of that. Come on, let me give you new life. Let me give you new perspective. I'm the only one who can give you the free gift of eternal life. And sometimes along our way, we get into this performance-based Christianity where I forget that it was God's grace who saved me, and I think I gotta work. I'm the one who's got myself this far. I'm the one who made it, and I better make it work now. They have forgotten. They have forgotten a lot of the story. Like we just sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, like we were at a Golden Corral buffet when we were in Egypt. Listen, Egypt wasn't a Golden Corral, friends. I like Golden Corral, by the way. I'm a fan. I'm a fan. I haven't been in several years because I don't know anybody else who is. But if you are, call me. Sometime, call me. I will try to hit that up. I've avoided buffets for a good portion of this last season of time to see, I don't know, contradictory to what would be most helpful. Anyway, all right. Sometimes we forget. We forget. It fuels our frustration. Here's the second word. Familiar. Familiar. Sometimes I add fuel to my frustration because I'm too attached to that which is familiar. I'm too attached to that which is familiar. For the Israelites, even though God was doing a brand new thing in their life, one of freedom and one of deliverance, there was still this attachment to what was familiar. And sometimes, again, as Jesus followers, I add fuel to my frustration because I'm too attached to my old sin pattern. Come on, the familiar sin pattern of my life before I met Jesus. It's familiar, but I love that it's familiar because I can predict how it made me feel. Come on, sometimes it's because I'm too attached to old relationships or old ways of doing relationships. Come on, I'm too attached, speaking of how sinful patterns make me feel, sometimes I get too attached to how dysfunctional relationships make me feel. Come on, and sometimes, even for us, if you're a single person, you can find yourself going back to another dysfunctional relationship or another one. They just go by a different name, but they've got the same dysfunctional patterns. And I keep doing that which I've been doing because it's familiar. I like it because I can predict that either I will ruin them or they will ruin me. And I like that because that's what I've been doing. And I'll do the same thing to myself over and over again. I get attached to familiar ways of thinking, and I can get too attached to familiar bad attitude. One of the ways you can add fuel to your frustration anytime you want to is to hold on to your familiar bad attitude that you don't like, and more than likely, it's not helping you love God and love your neighbor well. And I get how difficult that is. You ever have those moments where it's like my attitude has been really bad, but God is moving in my life, and I want to not be as hateful and frowning and awful as I have been over the course of these last few days, all right? It's maybe not you. You're better than this. I'm just, processing that which sometimes happens to me. And you go and you start to smile at somebody for the first time, and it feels weird, doesn't it? And you're like, oh, man, I'm smiling too much. I don't want for them to get the wrong idea that I'm happier than I actually am. Right? I don't want to smile at my spouse today because I didn't smile yesterday, and I don't want for them to think that today is better than yesterday was. Right? It pulls, it's true. It's true. And I can hear people like, smiling is not the most spiritual thing that you can do. Okay, you need right doctrine, and you need biblical understanding, and you need knowledge, and you need, I know. And I love how enthusiastic you are about all of those things and how appealing your life is to those who don't know Jesus because you've got all those things right, okay? Well, let's just hypothetically imagine for a moment that sometimes the joy of the Lord may want to come out of your life with a smile and some kind words, just hypothetically, just maybe, right? It's just a possibility. Let's open ourselves up to it, all right? And as soon as you start, you feel the pull. It's like, oh, I don't think I can. Though, because the frown is familiar, the frustration is familiar. This is, if I changed who I was, it wouldn't be the same. Yeah. That's sometimes why God brings us into the midst of the frustration in the wilderness to begin with. Because what was familiar wasn't working. what was familiar isn't what you were meant for. What was familiar is not what God designed you for, called you for. No, it's not what, He didn't bring you out of Egypt for you to live in that which is familiar to you. He brought you out of Egypt to set you free for something that is greater than that. Oh, sometimes any change is frustrating, even if it's good. Here's the third word to fuel your frustration. Third word is fear. It's fear. Fear is something that certain times situations provide for us. Sometimes there are legitimately scary situations, right? Sometimes we scream, we react, we respond to people. The Israelites were no doubt in a scary situation. It was scary in Egypt, and it was scary when they got out. But there was a fear that they didn't realize that existed, not in the situation that they were in, but that existed within. There was a fear that existed on the inside of them that they were so afraid that they would not be enough. They were so afraid that they wouldn't figure out what it was that they would be able to do next, which is why they're like, I would just rather have gone back, or I would rather just have died there in that fear. Because now I'm here in this scenario, and fear just continues to increase and grow on the inside of me. And that fear was present because they were trying to trust themselves for the answer to their frustration. They could only see their insufficiency, their inadequacy, and the insecurity that existed within themselves. It was a frightening and a scary, scary thing that only fueled their frustration. And sometimes, friends, if you get broken by Egypt like they got broken by Egypt, it is very, very difficult to get free from that, because fear becomes the state of your existence. Not just a situation that you experienced, but the state of your existence. And the more that I dwell on that which is fearful in and of myself because I'm inadequate and insufficient, the more fuel I add to the fatiguing frustration. And it is so surprising to me, though, what it is that happens next in this. It's the Israelites have brought their grumbling, their fatiguing frustration forward to Moses and Aaron in this moment. They're grumbling, they're complaining, and God is aware of this through Moses and Aaron, so God responds to them. Watch how God responds to them in this moment. I think it's helpful to us. Verse 4 says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you." What an interesting first line from God. In the midst of some frustrated people who are adding fuel to their frustration and who are grumbling and complaining about the frustration that they're facing, God's first move is to talk about what He is going to do to provide for them. I'm just telling y'all, God is a lot better than I am. God is a lot better than you are. Some days I'm just thankful that God is better to me than I would be to myself, because that's not how I respond to me in my grumbling and my fatiguing frustration, but He does. He has such compassion and love for His people. He's committed to His covenant and His relationship with them, and He says, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. These are instructions. In this way, I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. So God's like, I want to see if they will actually follow my instructions. So I'm going to give them some each day. They should take what they're supposed to that day. This is going to be a test. Now, why would God test them when they're already in this moment of frustration? Because the issue already was a trust in themselves. And God needed for them to be free from that which was adding fuel to their frustration. He wanted more for them than this, so this was the way that He did it. He continues, verse 5. On the sixth day, they are to prepare what they bring in. And that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. Because God is reminding them of the way that he set up the pattern in creation. He created and worked for 6 days, rested on seventh day. That becomes the Sabbath day that he desired for them to observe so that they could have this same pattern of rest and renewal set up in their lives. That's what he wanted for them to experience. So he said, on the sixth day, I'm going to give you enough even for day 7, so you don't even have to come out here and get food. This is a beautiful thing of what it is that God is offering. So I know there's a lot of dull, boring details in this. If you don't really like the Bible very much, I liked a few moments ago better, but watch where this is headed. All right. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, in the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. As if that whole Red Sea parting thing was not enough, right? He's like, you will know it was the Lord. It was. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us? Moses and Aaron talking to them. Moses also said, you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You're not grumbling against us, look at this, but against the Lord. Helpful reminder. Next time when you're in the midst of frustration, it might not actually be the person that you are next to or you were looking at's fault. It might not be on them. It's what happens in frustration, is that we begin to blame and we begin to think it's you. And they look at Moses and Aaron. Moses is like, let us be clear about this. You're not really frustrated with us. You're frustrated with God. And that seems inappropriate for us to say. Church-going people are really good at getting frustrated with the person next to them and letting them have it and take it out on them, rather than confessing, God, I'm actually frustrated with you right now. We convince ourselves that's not an invitation by God for us to express that. No, that's a little too inappropriate. But let's get to the root. God would rather wrestle with you at the root than he would for you to continue pouring out your frustration on some people whom it is not their fault. All right. So Moses and Aaron said to the entire Israelite community, come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. His power, his presence, his sign symbol. I'm still journeying with you. The Lord said to Moses, I've heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. That evening, quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is it? What is it? For they did not know what it was. By the way, sometimes when God provides for us, he provides for us in an unidentifiable way that leaves us looking at this moment in our life like, wait, what is it? I've not ever seen this before. What is it? This is something new before. But sometimes when we are in a new frustration, God will provide for us in a new way. Sometimes, in fact, the new frustration is an invitation for God to do a demonstration of his provision in a new way. The way was not the thing that was most important. The way was not what you should be about worshiping. The way is God himself. It wasn't just how he did the providing. It was that he is the provider, right? And so the Israelites saw this and they had asked this question. They did not know what it was. Moses said to them, It's the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer, it's like 3-point-something liters, not that you care, for each person you have in your tent. Now, a lot of Bible there. But I want to pull out of this now for us before I conclude this. 3 words for you in frustration. 3 words for you in frustration. 3 encouraging words for you in the midst of your fatiguing frustration. Here's number 1. It's faithful. Faithful. Did you notice that God responded to the grumbling of his people with his goodness? God is so good that he doesn't just respond to our grumbling, but he responds to our grumbling when we're in a season of fatiguing frustration with goodness. He lets us know, no, I am faithful to you. I'm faithful to you. He reminds them, here's what I want for you to see. I want for you to see that it was me that brought you out of Egypt. It will be me in the morning who's waiting for you when you get there. It is me right here in your present moment, even of deep frustration, that is here for you. The point of all of that in the midst of it, as Moses communicated, is that God wanted for them to know, I am the Lord your God. I am Alpha and Omega, the first, the last, the living one. I am faithful to you even when you're in the middle of nowhere. Even when you know what is behind you and you're eager for something in the future, but I'm faithful to you now. God is faithful to his promises. God is faithful to his people. God is faithful always to keep his covenant. Come on, God never stops being faithful to you. He doesn't. Come on. Even when you're not faithful to God, even when you're not faithful to you. It's who he is. He's so good. He continues to be faithful. He continues to provide. He continues to keep his promise to his people. And he set them up with the reminder that I want for you to work and create, and I want for you to receive these provisions from me that are physical and tangible 6 days a week, but I want for you to have Sabbath. I want for you to have Sabbath. Jesus reminded us that you are not for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath is for you. What God was after in this moment was letting them know, I brought you to a place that is not so busy and not so crazy, so you could rest with me. All they saw was the frustration. God's like, no, it's an invitation to rest with me. It's an invitation. Because it was crazy back there. It's going to be crazy moving forward. Right here, I want for you to rest with me. And the reason why Sabbath is so hard for them, and the reason why Sabbath is so hard for people to continue to practice, we always want to know, do I have to do that still? Like, do I have to have a 24-hour period each week where rest and time with God is the aim, the intent of that? You don't have to. But here's sometimes why it's such a struggle for us, because it's actually about trust. Because we sometimes don't trust that God is working unless we are. We sometimes don't trust that God can do anything or move while we're being still. We think, no, I gotta figure it out. I gotta fix it. And could it be that that's why we're so fatigued in our frustration anyway? Is because we're living like we're fixers and the whole world rides on us and depends on us, when God is like, no, I just want for you to be still and rest for a moment in me and know I never stop being faithful. Come on, I never stop working. I never stop moving. Come on, I don't stop being there for you. You can trust me. You can trust me. So Here's how they decide to respond to that. Okay, I'm gonna go through this relatively quickly. There's a bunch of different moving parts and pieces, so you gotta be tracking with me here so we can go down the stretch and boom, conclude this thing well. All right, you're with me. Here we go. Verse 17, here's how they respond. The Israelites did as they were told. At least initially, I love this. Some gathered much, some little. So like people, the ones like, I'll take a lot. Others like, it'll be fine. We'll take a little, right? You know, people like this, like, we should probably prepare as much as we can. Others like, it'll be fine. God always shows up, just, roll with it, right? And so this is how they are. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. The right amount here based upon what God had instructed them. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it until morning, right? Because you're just supposed to have it. It's my daily bread. Come on. When Jesus talks about praying this way, it's an echo of him going back to this scene of this moment. No one is to keep any of it until morning. However, because we're fantastic listeners and we always do what God asks us to do, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell, so Moses was angry with it. Now Moses is starting to get like I do in the minivan when people are not listening to me, and it's just like, hey, you're gonna have to eat it, okay? Just listen. This is lunch whether you want it or not. I sat in the line at Chick-fil-A for 14 days for these nuggets. You will have them and you will like it. Right? Because Lord knows I can refrigerate them for a day, but on day 2, even Chick-fil-A starts to get a little not so fresh. Right? Moses starts to get a little angry. He's like, what am I gonna do with these people? God brought us bread from heaven, and you still can't just eat it. Just eat it. That's all. And you're like, no, we need more. And it begins to rot. Maggots get all in it, which is the leftovers of our disobedience. Which, by the way, sometimes in some seasons, we're dealing with what stinks from our disobedience in the last one. It takes a while for that to wear off. Let me just encourage somebody for a moment. It doesn't always go away like that. It's a message for another day, another time. So here's what happens in this moment. In this scene, they did as they were told, some of them. No one is to keep it until morning. Some of them don't listen. Moses is angry. Each morning, verse 21, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. All right, so this is good. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person, and the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. This is going well. He said to them, this is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake, boil what you want to boil, save whatever is left, and keep it until morning. So they saved it until morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. Eat it today, Moses said, because today is the Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any. Continues this theme. Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather it, but they found that. They continued like, well, we'll just go check, just in case. We just can't let it go. I 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 can't let it go. I'm telling you, friends, those were the people whom even in the midst of God's great provisions, they continue to fuel their frustration. They continue to fatigue themselves because they showed up trying to do something that they didn't have to do, trying to carry a weight that they didn't have to carry. Some of them went out. Here's how this scene concludes. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. This is why on the 6th day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the 7th day. No one is to go out. So finally here, the people rested on the 7th day. Rested in their fatiguing frustration. Rested from trying to carry the weight of the world on themselves. So the people of Israel called the bread manna. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. was satisfying, was fulfilling, was not only easily delivered and accessible, but it was good. It was good. Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come so they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the wilderness when I brought you out of Egypt. So Moses and Aaron took a jar and put an omer of manna in it, then place it before the Lord to be kept for generations to come. Let me give you the second word for you in frustration, and then I'm gonna close really quickly. Second word for you in frustration is for. God is for his people. God is for his people. God is for his church. If God is for you, who can be against you? God is for his people. God is for you, even in the midst of fatiguing frustration. Come on, God is for you, even when you have been in this zone where you've been rejecting him. God is for you when you've been in this zone where you don't trust him and you keep trying to fix it yourself. And here's what he wanted for them to do. He wanted for them to get a vision of also being for the future generations. I want for you to be for them. I want for you to keep this testimony and story of my provision in your life, and I want for you to leave a legacy. I want for you to always be about pointing people to me, and that's ultimately what this scene does for us in Jesus, because when Jesus comes, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. I am the bread of life. Come on. He who eats from me will never hunger again, right? Jesus is satisfying and fulfilling, not just us looking to heaven for God to bring bread for today, but from heaven to earth came God's one and only Son, living amongst us, dying for us, rising from the dead and ascending to heaven, letting us know, hey, bread is alive still. Come on, the story God is writing is still being written. He's faithful to always be for people. And that brings me to this third word for us, frustration, which is future. Future. It was about the future generations. Put this in a jar. Put this in a jar. And they set it at the tabernacle where God was dwelling amongst the people. And it stayed there. These 40 years until they get to Canaan, until they get on the brink of promised land. It's in that jar. God cares about your future. God cares about future generations to come. God has and God is a hope and a future. So in the midst of fatiguing frustration, friends, don't lose your vision for the future. Don't let the present fatiguing frustrations convince you that there is no future for you and that God can't do something out of this present moment. I want to speak into future generation. I think there's something beautiful in this jar. Them taking something that was a reminder of the power of God, the presence of God, provision of God, putting in this jar. And I had this thought in my mind of what I heard Paul write in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. That's what he said about us. He says, we have this treasure in jars of clay. That's us. That's me. A jar of clay, a frail, fragile, weak, chipped, broken down jar of clay. He says, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not us. That God wants for the world to actually be able to see, for us in the midst of our fatiguing frustration, man, I am frail, Come on, I'm weak, I'm weary, I get broken down, and honestly, you could break this jar apart relatively easy in some way, but there's something on the inside of the jar. And there's something on the inside of the jar that's worth living for, friends. There's something that God has placed on the inside of the jar that causes us to not just get up in the morning and be like, oh, but I'm just a jar. I'm just a jar. And I'm so fatigued. I'm just a jar. I'm just a jar trying to parent these kids, right? I'm just a jar. Just a jar who's so filled with fear that's the reason why sometimes why dads are walking away from their families, right? Not because they don't love their wife and their kids, because they're so filled with fear. What if I'm not enough? What if I'm inadequate, insufficient? I'm just a jar. Right? And we walk away from workplace opportunities, and we walk away from what God's called us to in the church, and we walk away from our joy, and we walk away from our peace, and we walk away from our faith, and we walk away from all of these things just saying, I'm just a jar. I'm just a jar. When I hear God saying to somebody today, I know that you are just a jar, but I've put my power in it. I know that you're just a jar, but you've got my provision in you. I know you're just a jar, come on, but my presence is dwelling on the inside of you. You might look like just a jar on the outside, but on the inside of you is my spirit. On the inside of you, the Holy Spirit of God lives and breathes and gives life to you. Come on, I know you're just a jar, but if you stare at that which is on the outside of you, you'll live like there's nothing better on the inside of you. Come on, and you'll stay stuck in the fatiguing frustration that you're in. But come on, if we begin to look on the inside of the jar, there's beauty in it. There's grace in it. There's mercy in it. There's calling in it. There's fulfillment in it. Come on, there's something greater on the inside of you that God has put there, and He won't stop moving in your life until His vision for the future is bubbling up on the inside of you. That people look at you and they're like, that manna that God placed in that man, that manna that God placed in that woman, it was never about them and the jar. It's all about the faithfulness of their God. And He never left them. And He never forgot about them. And He never stopped being faithful to them. And He never stopped being committed to them. And He never let go of His plan. Never let go. Never let go. Never let go. Might just be a jar. What God's put in you. It's where your value is. Come on, it's where your hope is. It's where your strength is. And my fatiguing frustration, as much as it lingers and sets in, pales in comparison to His glory. Lives in me, lives in you. I want to pray for us. And would you just stand with me for a moment so I can pray for you? And I know, friends, you hear things like this, you think to yourself, great, Monday's still coming. I still have to go home today. Still got to deal with me. All I've got going on. There's no denying how fatiguing the frustration is. But could I just remind us today in this moment, I know you're fatigued, but you're not forsaken. Well, I know you're frustrated. You're not forsaken. Well, I know you're afraid. You're not forsaken. Well, I know your jar is chipped. It's got some cracks in it. I know it's breaking down. Well, I know. You can't even begin to imagine today how much God loves you. How valuable that which is placed on the inside of you in His presence, power and provision is. God, I thank you. God, I thank you. I thank you that you love us like you do. And God, I can't even imagine all of the fatigue and all of the frustration that exists in every life in this room. I barely know the tip of the iceberg of some of them. And I don't know of all of the fatiguing frustration of people listening in right now online. But God, you do. And you didn't bring us into this wilderness to die. You brought us here. You brought us here to be an example of a generation who knows that their God is faithful and who believes that their God is for them and believes that their God is a hope and a future. We believe that today, Lord, and we cling to that today. We'll be that people. We'll be that generation. And right now in this moment, come on, if you're in this room or you're listening online or you don't know Jesus today, you don't have a relationship with Him, but right now in this moment, you're like, I gotta say yes to Jesus. Come on, I need for Him to save me, forgive me, rescue me, redeem me, make me new. There's not magical words to say or a magical prayer to pray, but there's a genuine moment of calling out to Jesus. Come on, I just want to lead you in it right now. Right now, you call out to Jesus. Jesus, I know I need you. Jesus, I bring my brokenness to you. Jesus, I thank you for who you are. I believe you gave your life for me. I believe you're alive. And right now, in this moment, I ask you, would you save me, forgive me, make me new? Jesus, I receive you. I receive new life and the gift of eternal life. And right now, I give you my life. All that I am, I'm yours, Jesus. Right now, I give you my life. If that's you in the room or online, when I count to 3, you just lift your hand to Jesus and say, yes, that is me. I give you my life today, Lord. Right now. 1, 2, 3. That's me. Right now.